You're listening to the Catholic Wives Desiring Peace podcast. Today's episode is about hurting and healing and how they are two sides of the same coin. Are you a Catholic wife grappling with challenging in-laws? The Catholic Wives Desiring Peace podcast is your sanctuary for navigating these sometimes stormy seas of life with toxic in-laws, while being validated for what you've experienced. Join me, your host, Miriam Susan, a Catholic wife who's weathered nearly 3 decades of in-law drama, as we tackle the tough issues you're dealing with head on. Merry Christmas. This is your host, Miriam Susan. I hope that you have had a joyous Christmas day and that you are enjoying this new season of the liturgical calendar, the Christmas season. And I pray that this time of year is one that is filled with the joy that comes from knowing that our Savior is born. Today, we're going to be talking about hurting and healing and how those two emotions or those two states of mind are very much two different sides of the same coin. I want to open up with a scripture from Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 1 through 4. And these are probably fairly familiar. And it says, "For everything there is a season, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh." Now, obviously, that is not the entire 4 verses, but those are the parts of the verses that I wanted to highlight for this episode. And really what I want to talk about today is how when we are in this situation with toxic in-laws, obviously we desire peace. That's the name of my podcast. That's the name of my business, Desiring Peace. But we cannot actually achieve peace without some sense of healing. And that healing cannot come until we first take some time to actually acknowledge that there has been a hurt. There has been pain. There has been something that has happened that has caused pain for you and your husband and your family, and possibly for your in-laws, but I'm not going into that today. And it's something that we do have to acknowledge. We cannot begin to heal until we actually acknowledge that there has been hurt. I kind of imagine this to be similar to something like an actual physical wound. Sometimes we are busy throughout the day, and the next thing we know, we look down and we're bleeding. And we cannot help that healing process along until we acknowledge that there has been a wound, there has been some kind of hurt. Same thing with issues within our bodies that we can't really see what they are. We can't really see what's going on, but we have to acknowledge that there is an issue that needs to be addressed. And once we address what the issue is, after that, that's when the healing can begin. That's when we can start to figure out what is going to help us, what is going to bring about healing, what is going to bring about a resolution to whatever the issue is. And the same thing very much goes for emotional hurts. We cannot begin to heal what has happened to us until we kind of look at it in the face and acknowledge it and understand that it is actually some kind of hurt, that there has been some kind of transgression that has hurt us emotionally, possibly physically, psychologically. Very often that happens as well. And sometimes even spiritually, if our toxic in-laws do like to wield the weapon of spiritual abuse. So we really have to take some time to acknowledge that something has happened. And we need to understand as wives that we might not be, and it's actually kind of unusual if you are, at the same stage of healing and really coming to a realization that there was some hurt to begin with. As wives, oftentimes we are the ones who notice what's going on. Our husbands have lived with it their entire lives, most likely. They have lived with whatever the hurt is, whatever the abuse is, for their whole lives. And we come into the picture after he's been living with it for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and we can see it much more easily, much more clearly, and often much more quickly than our husbands can. So the acknowledgement and the stage of healing for him is going to be very different than ours. Even if we try to explain it to him, even if we bring it up, and often we are the ones who bring the hurt, bring the abuse to light, because for our husbands, that's just how things are. That's just how dad is. That's just how mom is. And for them, the toxic behavior is normal because that's all they know. So when we come in, we see the dysfunction, we see the disordered treatment of our spouse and of ourselves and of our families. And it's often much easier for us to see it and acknowledge that hurt. So just because you see it and you bring it up to your husband, do keep in mind that his process through this whole thing is going to be different than yours. It's going to be starting at a different place, and it's going to have a different pace with which he deals with it compared to us as wives. One thing I have to bring up that is really, really important and can be a common problem when dealing with toxic in-laws is denial. Oftentimes, our husbands, because this is the only behavior they know from their parents, they will be in denial of what is actually hurting him, hurting your marriage, hurting your family. And the denial of that will actually prolong the healing process. So when we minimize or deny our hurt with thoughts like, well, they probably didn't mean it, or I should just get over it, or good Catholics forgive and forget. When we tell ourselves these things, or when we actually speak them aloud, we are actually suppressing legitimate pain. It's like you have some abdominal pain. You don't know what's going on. You just know that there's some abdominal pain. And so what do? You mask it. You take Tylenol, you take Advil, you use heating pads, you do all kinds of things, and you just try to mask it. But whatever is going on has to be dealt with. And until you deal with it, the healing process cannot begin. This denial, when it comes to our husbands just kind of denying or not being aware, maybe denial is a little bit of a harsh way to say it, but just maybe not acknowledging, not being aware of what's going on, we can be in a sense of denial as well. I know I was for many, many years, and that can come out in many different ways. An example that might resonate with you is feeling guilty for having your feelings hurt when your mother-in-law offers some quote unquote helpful suggestions, but really it's her taking jabs at you. But because of how it's presented, because of the craftiness of her words, it comes across as a helpful suggestion, but really she's being ugly to you. And it makes you feel bad. It hurts your feelings. The sense of denial might come up in this idea that, you try to convince yourself that your in-laws' constant, unannounced visits aren't really that big of a problem. It's just the culture. It's just how things are. It's just how she grew up. It's just the way she does things. That's making excuses for toxic behavior, which can then cause everything to just even be worse because you're not really dealing with what the actual issue is. So this suppression or this denial or this overlooking of toxic behavior can manifest in many different ways. It can come up in other areas of our marriage. It can be that you and your husband are discussing something that has absolutely nothing to do with your in-laws. But because you have this pain of whatever is going on between you and your in-laws, that kind of overflows into other areas of your life. It might be that you get to the point where you are not really able to set healthy boundaries because you think nothing is wrong. And again, all of these can be applied to your husband as well. I'm just taking the stance of the daughter-in-law of these toxic in-laws just for simplicity's sake. We might even get to the point, because of our denial of what's actually going on, that we start doubting our own perceptions. How many times has it happened to you where something's happened with your in-laws and you've just played it off, or your husband has kind of played it off, and you start thinking, I'm the crazy one. I'm the one who's the problem. I'm the one who's causing the issues, when in fact, that's not the case. Now, I'm not saying that we daughters-in-law are perfect. By no means. I'm not saying that at all. But what I am saying is, often with these toxic dynamics and these relationships, if we don't acknowledge what's actually happening, if we don't acknowledge the truth, we can start to feel like everything is our fault. Everything is because of us. If I had just served the food that my mother-in-law liked, that whole visit would have been fine. If I had just let my father-in-law watch that awful movie, even though the kids were present, the rest of the day would have been much better. Those are the kinds of things that I'm talking about. And then as we go along and we don't address the hurts that we experience, they tend to compound with every new incident. They don't get better. Turning a blind eye doesn't work because you're still carrying wounds. It's like getting scraped over and over and over again, and you don't allow that wound to heal, and it's going to fester and it's going to get infected and it's going to get worse. And that's what happens with our emotions. I feel like we've gotten better as a society acknowledging that emotions and mental health and emotional health are very valid, and they're just as valid as our physical health. But oftentimes, we don't really see the value in helping ourselves mentally and emotionally and spiritually. The key to all of this is that real healing requires you honestly acknowledging what is happening. Just like we wouldn't tell somebody with diabetes, just get over it. We wouldn't tell somebody with a broken arm, just get over it. You'll be fine. Just let time go by. It'll heal. Emotional wounds need to be properly acknowledged and cared for in order to heal correctly. Your husband is going to have his own unique position. His journey from hurting to healing is going to be different. Why? Because these are his parents. These are the people that God entrusted with raising him and bringing him up in a right way, in a good way. And if there's damage to that core relationship, it's going to be very different than us healing from any wounds coming from our in-laws, because there's not that familial tie. What it can also look like with your husband's different position than what you have is that he is most likely going to come to a point where he has a sense of torn loyalties, because he feels like he should be loyal to his parents. He may have had a lot of spiritual leaders who have told him that that's important, which it is, but we have to take scriptures and the teachings of the Catholic Church as a whole. We cannot cherry pick little things out of the scriptures in order to manipulate and hurt others. And so when our husbands are faced with different scriptures that his parents use, perhaps, or he hears in a homily that talk about honoring your parents, it's very difficult because he will be more prone to excuse those harmful actions, because especially if he is a Catholic man or professes to be a Christian man, he will be torn, because if he was raised in a Catholic home, if he was raised in a Christian home like my husband was, his parents may very likely use scriptures against him in order to try to control and manipulate. And we know that toxic parents, even ones who are not religious, will often find those scriptures, find those verses to basically stab our husbands in the heart, especially if our husbands are trying to be strong, faithful Catholic men. They will use those to manipulate him in order to get him to be on their side. So that can cause some serious conflict in our husbands' minds and hearts, feeling like they made a vow to us when we got married, but these are his parents, and he's told to honor his father and mother. I actually had a discussion with a priest very recently about the difficulty of dealing with that. And he did say, he's like, you cannot pull scriptures out. You cannot pull out one little story from scriptures about how a man is supposed to honor his parents and disregard the entirety of the rest of the scriptures. If our husbands are putting themselves and their families in a situation where they are being abused, even if it's not physical, even if it's only emotional and spiritual, that's still abuse. And I say only in air quotes because it is still very much abuse. And those are wounds that are hard to see. But you cannot do that and think that you're doing the right thing. You cannot take a single collection of verses and pull them out and think that this is the scripture that I have to live by, because that's not how it works. We have to take the entirety of the Bible and the teachings of the Catholic Church in order to apply things to our lives. So oftentimes spiritual abusers love to pull out scriptures to jab our husbands, and it ends up just causing a lot of hurt, and it pushes the progress for healing much further down the line. Now, your husband is not going to recognize the hurt like you will. He won't. We have a different perspective. We have an outsider's perspective. If we did not grow up in a toxic family, we will see things differently. We will see things faster. So understand that it's going to take a bit of a different timeline for your husband to recognize what is going on. For me and my husband, he saw it early on, but he didn't understand the magnitude of it until we had already been married a good 10, 15 years. And that's a long time. That's a long time to be a wife in a relationship like that. And I thank God, and I am so grateful that my husband did finally see it, and we are where we are now. Now I want to talk about a deeper truth about healing. Healing does not mean forgetting, period. Our toxic in-laws think it should. They think that we're just going to forget it and things will be fine. But we all know that's not how it works. We can put on a fake mask and pretend that we're just a happy family, but that doesn't mean we're healed. So healing does not mean forgetting what has happened. Boundaries are not punishment. We have talked about this in other episodes. Boundaries, when you set boundaries, it is not a form of punishment. It is a form of protection. A protection for yourself, for you and your husband as individuals, for you and your husband as a couple, and for your family as a whole. That's what boundaries are. Now, will our in-laws take them as punishment? Most likely, because they're toxic. Toxic people see boundaries as punishment. Emotionally mature and healthy people see boundaries as a boundary, period. That's all it is. We have to also understand, and this truth about healing is that there is a connection between respecting your own hurt and authentic forgiveness. We can acknowledge that we've been hurt, and over time and through a lot of prayer, we can forgive those who have hurt us authentically and genuinely. We can look at the actions that they have done and forgive. That is often a very critical part of the healing process. sometimes it is very difficult to forgive. And I understand. Believe me, I understand. It has taken many, many years for me to get to the point. I feel like I have truly forgiven my in-laws for what they have done and what they continue to do. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to just forget what has happened and walk right back into their toxic paradigm. And the same thing for my husband. So let's talk about this sacred nature that comes with a marriage. You know, one of my favorite verses to quote is Genesis 2:24. Therefore, a man leaves his father and his mother and clings to his wife, and they become one flesh. That is biblical. It is Catholic. That is the nature of marriage. It is sacred and it is appointed by God. It's a sacrament. We have to protect our marriages. We have to. And sometimes when we protect our marriage, it sometimes feels like it's causing hurt towards our in-laws. Because our in-laws, if they've had an open door into our marriages, if they've had an open door into your husband's life and your life and the lives of your kids, if you start protecting that, if you start putting up just little boundaries, just little walls, they're going to feel like they're being punished. They're going to feel like we are hurting them. But that's not the case. Now, are there times when women in our situations do create boundaries to punish? Yes, because we're human. But that is not the goal of a boundary. The goal is of a boundary to say, this is where I end, this is where my marriage ends, and this is where you begin. It is basically just a statement of, this is who I am, and this is separate from you. I'm going to do things differently. I'm going to have different opinions, and that's okay. You can have yours, but it's not going to affect ours anymore. That's basically what a boundary is. And a healthy boundary often will lead to healthier relationships long term, provided the people you set these boundaries with are healthy people and they accept them. But chances are, if you're listening to this podcast, that's not the situation you're in, is it? I do believe that some of my listeners are in a situation where they can put healthy boundaries in place and their in-laws will respond well. They'll respond well. They will do and honor and respect their marriages. But if you have toxic in-laws, that's probably not going to happen, unfortunately. This journey of going from hurt by your in-laws to healing in spite of your in-laws requires tremendous patience for yourself and for your spouse. It cannot happen, in my opinion, without a significant amount of prayer. It cannot happen without supernatural faith in God and leaning on Him and trusting that He will see you through this very, very difficult trial. But at the same time, understanding this two-sided coin of healing and hurt, it can bring freedom. We cannot heal until we acknowledge what has happened. And so if your husband is not at that point where he is able to acknowledge what has gone on with his family, pray for him, and find gentle ways as best you can. I know sometimes it's very, very, very hard to be patient, but find gentle ways to show him, not necessarily tell him, but to show him what is going on. Show him the toxicity. Show him how it's affecting you and your marriage. Show him how it is affecting your children. Show him how to be like St. Joseph in your marriage, protecting your family, defending your family against the evils that come from outside, even if those evils come from his family. I know that many of you have been dealing with a lot at the end of this year. All the holidays, all of the gatherings, all of the pushes to be the bigger person. Why don't you just reach out? It's Christmas. Christmas is about family. Christmas is about forgiveness. No, Christmas is about Jesus. Christmas is about Jesus. So many of these people that say these things, they have no idea what has actually happened. Chances are they've only heard your in-laws' side of the story. They don't know what has been said, what has been written, what has been done behind closed doors, because toxic people tend to be really good at hiding their ugliness from outsiders. Know that after these holidays, if they have been especially rough for you, and we're not quite through yet because we still got New Year's, we still have Epiphany, there's still so much to come, but just know that you're not alone. Know that there are so many other women who are going through this at the same time, which is awful. It's awful. But at the same time, there is a sense of comfort that comes from knowing that you're not alone and you're not the only one that's going through these issues. So do know that I am praying for you. You are in my prayers. Even if I don't know you by name, you are in my prayers. And know that healing can come. It's not a straight road. It's not a straight path. There are many turns. There's lots of U-turns where you go backwards and you have to go forwards again. And then you take a different path. And it never quite moves as smoothly as you would like it to, but it does come. It does come. So know that I'm praying for you. I'm praying for you specifically, but I'm also praying for your marriages, and I'm praying for your husbands, and I'm praying for your families, and even praying for your in-laws. My husband and I pray pretty much every night for a miracle, because that's what it's going to take for our family. We haven't seen it yet. We've been praying for over 5 years, specifically for a miracle, because that's about the time we went no contact. Actually, rapidly coming up on 6 years. 6 years since we've been no contact with my in-laws. And that no contact has actually brought the greatest amount of peace that we've ever experienced in our marriage. There are still hurts, but having the space of no contact really has brought a level of healing that could not happen while we were still being injured. So know that I understand very well what it's like to be in this situation, and know that you are in my prayers. God bless you. Go in peace. Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode. If you've ever wondered just how toxic your relationship with your in-laws really is, I've got the perfect tool for you. Introducing the new free Toxic In-Laws Assessment, a self-graded quiz designed to help you identify the true level of toxicity in your relationship with your in-laws. Whether you're unsure if your in-laws are really that bad, or you think they might be worse than you realize, this assessment will give you the clarity you need. Don't leave it to guesswork. Take the free Toxic In-Laws Assessment now and start your journey towards healthier and more peaceful family dynamics. Visit desiringpeace.com/quiz to get started. Disclaimer. All content and information on this podcast and our website, including our programs, products, and/or services, is for information and educational purposes only and does not constitute professional medical, psychiatric, or mental health advice of any kind, and does not establish any kind of professional client relationship by your listening to this podcast or use of my website. A professional client relationship with you is only formed after we have expressly entered into a written agreement with you that you have signed, including our fee structure and other terms to work with you in a specific matter. Although we strive to provide accurate general information, the information presented here is not a substitute for any kind of professional advice, and you should not rely solely on this information. Always consult a professional in the area for your particular needs and circumstances prior to making any professional, medical, or mental health related decisions.